here is sort of the key agendas here. In many ways, the most important thing I'm going to start, even before we get to the slide itself, is you tell people what you want to know and what you want them to do and how, not how you want them to do it necessarily, but what good looks like in how they do it, right? Are you a company where moving fast is more important than building for the long term? I've been at companies that do both. That is a different question. That is something you want candidates to know. That is something as a candidate you want a straight answer from, because it's hard enough to hire, and especially when we're talking about games and startups are different challenges. I've done a lot of both, but fundamentally you want people to not be surprised with the process from the very beginning. We're looking for this. That's what this means. Here's what good looks like. We are going to do this in our process. And then a good candidate goes, okay, they've been very straightforward. I trust them, right?
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't work out in either the interview or ultimately even the job, at least you feel like people have been straight with you, and you've saved a lot of hassle for everybody.
Yeah.
But there are some tricks to it.
Yeah, maybe that actually probably leads perfectly into this concept that you've been talking a lot about. And I've kind of, I mentioned like, you should write a book about this, Bill, because this is some real stuff here. But like Bill has this concept called radical transparency. And I really love this. And I think it's a little bit of what you were just talking about. Maybe, what does that like mean to you? And why is radical transparency in hiring such an important concept?
So let's talk about it in the context if I'm going to hire somebody junior versus somebody senior. If I'm hiring somebody junior, let's say they're coming in fresh out of school as a game engineer, right? I want them to understand the difference between coming into a little company where what games are going to make will change radically. My current company, I said, you're going to get treated well. If it works, everybody's going to buy a house, and we're going to make good stuff, but no promises to what we will make, because we are going to be opportunistic because we're a little company. We don't have advantage.
Yeah.
So I was crystal clear that don't get attached to the kind of game we'll make. At Zynga, for example, my overwhelming message was, this thing, it's growing faster than we can control. It's going to be a chaotic shit show. Embrace the chaotic shit show, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
But the upside is tons of opportunity to grow your career. You're going to get to do cool stuff. You have a ton of users to sort of play with and do stuff with. EA, for example, is a pitch of come in and make good games. EA, and I worked at King as well, it only matters if you make a big game. So that's a very specific mindset that you want to convey to people. You say, look, what matters here? The reality of EA, for anybody who's ever worked there, and I assume some of the people on the call, is make your boss happy, number one. Number two, get along because it's a big high school. And number three, they do actually care about you making a good game, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality of EA. I think all those things are true for everybody at every level. The reality at Zynga was, it's a shit show. Be aggressive, especially early, it's changed, but be aggressive because everyone's too busy to think about it, so just go act sensibly. And it didn't matter if you had sort of rough edges, because the company itself had lots of rough edges, and aspiring to make good games. We certainly didn't at the beginning.
Yeah.
King is for example, a very European company where everybody was super nice. The processes were great. It's make something big, but do it in a European bureaucracy. People are nice, they're talented, and there's lots of support, but that's the environment you're in, right? And the point of saying, I'm just using 3 examples of fairly big companies, is they're all making games. They're all a good fit for some people, and they're all a bad fit for some people. I mean, one of the key things with EA is I think I might have only been the only vice president ever hired there who hadn't worked there or been acquired. And what I think we all underestimated was what a culture clash not being familiar with the culture of EA was at a senior level. Both ways, right? And that's just something that it's obvious in retrospect, but it's something that I'd been used to places like Zynga or Roblox, which were much less stratified, where people hadn't been at the same company for 30 years.
Yeah.
And that was something that mutually I would have behaved differently in that job had I understood that later. I made mistakes earlier that I wasn't wrong, but I created problems that I didn't need to have, is how I would put it. And as a senior person, that was very important, because as you get senior, not only are you fucking up, but you're fucking up all the people that report to you. Right. And I would say some other things about this. So I'm sort of trying to give a concrete example. I will also comment, I've given you sort of flavor within games. Within more startup world, Roblox is not a game company, and it doesn't feel like it. It's more like a platform. It's more fundamentally, it sees itself much more like, say, although people aren't happy with them right now, they see themselves more like Meta or Unity or somewhere like that. So that's another important distinction in who you want working there. Because at Roblox, it was much more than it is in games. Roblox was very much about the player experience because they didn't care about the game, they cared about the player, right? Whereas game companies, you should care about the game before the player, because players, even if somebody loves Madden, doesn't mean they're going to play NBA, right?
Yeah.
And so it's fundamentally that different thing. But I think communicating honestly to people both ways, you're going to set people up for whether they're going to be effective. Because I've been fired, I've fired people, I've hired lots of people. Like, it's not fun, but in the long run, everybody's going to do better if you're just upfront about what you want and what you're good at both ways, right?
Yeah.
And I would say, as a candidate, it's very easy for your first job. First job, you take the first decent job that comes along. Of course you do. Once you start to get some more experience, especially once you've had 5 years and you're starting to jump, is this company giving me a straight answer? Are they behaving how they behave to me in the interview? Both ways. Both the candidate and the company are the nicest they're ever going to be. They're putting on their first date face, right?
Yeah.
And they are telling you who they are, especially if they're being deceptive. You know what kind of company you can walk into. Whereas I think just being very transparent and telling people, this is a company where fundamentally we want to make something great, but we have to do it within an existing culture. Or, you know what? Shit's going to change all the time. Accept that.
Yeah.
Those are, you're doing everybody a favor.
Yeah. I mean, what's the cost of not being radically transparent, I guess?
Hires.
Bad hires.
Yeah, bad hires. And the thing about senior hires is, if anybody here, I won't ask for raising hands or anything. If we're all in the same room, I might. But everybody's had a boss who, the second this person came in, you're like, oh God, this is going to be a disaster. You just knew whether that person was good or bad, they were the wrong person for that company, right?
Yeah.
I've been the wrong person. I've been the right person. I've been both of those, right? It just happens. And the thing with a junior person, it's annoying, but a senior person screws stuff up. Like Zynga, I'll use an example. Long after I'd left Zynga, they had a leading poker game and they screwed it up because a guy came in and just did something that was just so obviously wrong to the business.
Yeah.
He they tested it, it was doing badly. He pushed an entire update and it tanked the game forever.
Oof.
Right. And that was a cultural clash. And that's not to pick on the guy, but like, I mean, that was a fundamental misalignment of culture. Right. And I've seen that at other places. I got in trouble in my first week at EA because I really wanted a dude to not stay in San Francisco. And so to get him to go to Sacramento, I offered him what I thought was a very modest amount of shares. It turned out I did it wrong and I couldn't do that, which I was very used to. Having that as something that I saw as a routine ability at other jobs, and which at EA I didn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I had sort of set myself up a little bit for failure there because I'm like, I want to start the week in between Christmas and New Year because I wanted a quiet week to read all my stuff, prowl around, just sort of get my head into the business. And this guy happened to be around, which is how I chatted with him. And that actually went against it because I was doing what I thought of as sort of typical initiative, not appreciating that I was going to a company with such a formed process. And they weren't necessarily wrong. I mean, I didn't like it and it was annoying in the short term, but like they weren't necessarily wrong. And it's like, you know, if you only want to date a certain kind of person, say what kind of person you want to date. I mean, you can say it politely, you can say it respectfully, but say it because that's who you actually want to date. And for hiring, I mean, obviously within the realm of law, you're not going to say I only want to hire white dudes or whatever. But, you know, if you're like, I want people who will do what they're told and do a good job, you shouldn't say it quite that bluntly, but you should say, this is something where this is our culture. And if you're a company where, you know, like, I don't care. I know I'm going to deal with a bunch of people who are rough around the edges, but I need people who can make decisions very quickly and do sort of a half-assed job to figure out what's chasing. I mean, at Zynga, we did that. We would make games in a few days to see if it was worth making. We started making ads for games when there was no game just to see it. And that's an important mindset. That was correct because at that time, Facebook games were a land grab. All that mattered was getting users and it was about winning the platform, right? Quality didn't matter until much later. And my point in that is I'm not necessarily offering a value judgment. It's just being honest about what the company is and you as the employee, who you are. Are you somebody who likes chaos? Are you somebody who is someone who will, left alone, do better and better things over time? Both are valuable, right? Yeah. And the thing is, people are bad about being honest and they're bad to their detriment, right? And people tend to think too short term and they tend to think, I always think of it as that bad high school mindset of people are judging me based on what I wear. Right. It just doesn't fucking matter.
Well, actually, this is a great point. Like, you know, because I think that there's these fantastic companies right now that are, you know, GameFi first, and they've got like maybe a crypto aspect. And I think probably in their hiring stories, it could be a little challenging talking to, you know, maybe a little embarrassing or something like. So how would you recommend getting over something like that? And it's probably just like you're saying, worth it to just be completely, you know, straight about something like that, right? So
another this may sound counterintuitive, but Austin, the the fastest parallel was Zynga because we hired so many people. I was there from 35 people to 3,500 people in the course of 2 years. And one of the tricks that I realized was make the newest people teach you. So we'd hire somebody, if they looked like they were going to go well, and you usually know pretty quickly if someone's going to work out.
Yeah.
I'd be like, hey, should I change this? So I wasn't afraid to make the new people do stuff, including telling me what kind of things I should hire. Like I have, and I can talk about this in another slide, a very, very structured form of interviewing that I experimented with and adopted because it focused on what was most important. It was designed to help me not get hung up on whether somebody had worked on something I liked, or whether I liked them or I thought they were funny, or it was designed to reduce my own bias. And I'll talk about that with senior folks too. But really, I mean, the overwhelming goal up front is to strip away the bullshit. All you care about is this person actually going to be good at the job and be able to function in your company?
Yeah.
And notice the order in which I say this. I would rather somebody who's awesome, who's sort of an awkward cultural fit, than somebody who's a great culture fit, who's decent. Because with games, honestly, with games and startups, both of which I like, somebody who's awesome is worth the hassle.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right? Unless they're a terrible person, I will happily take the most awkward programmer, the weirdest game designer, the most annoying whatever, as long as they're not a bad person and they're awesome.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it's this person awesome? And then do I think this person can survive and thrive in our culture?